Hey, hello, third grade. This is Mr. McAuliffe coming to you from, once again, you guessed it, your classroom. I'm here to read with someone. Today, that will be with you. Last week when I read the book, The Little Engine That Could, to all the classes throughout the building, I enjoyed that so much that I wanted to do that again. So, once again, this week I'm reading a story that I've picked out. Let me back up a little bit. So today's Wednesday, April 22nd, 2020. And even though it is spring on the calendar, we all awoke to some snow on the ground. I had to shovel this morning and brush my car off, something that I shouldn't be doing in late April. I'm not sure if you can hear the wind howling behind me, coming in through the windows. But once again, like I said, I'm here to read you a story. The book that I chose for this week is called Two Bad Ants, not one, but Two Bad Ants. And we'll find out in a little bit what makes them naughty. This book was written by an author by the name of Chris Van Allsburg. Does that name ring a bell to any of you? Mr. Van Allsburg wrote one of the most famous Christmas stories of all time. It's my favorite Christmas book, and we happen to celebrate that story here at St. Margaret's around Christmas time. If you think you know what other book Chris Van Allsburg wrote, let me know. Two Bad Ants. News traveled swiftly through the tunnels of Ant World. A scout had returned with a remarkable discovery, a beautiful sparkling crystal. When the scout presented the crystal to an ant queen, she took a small bite, then quickly devoured the entire thing. She deemed it the most delicious food she had ever tasted. Nothing could make her happier than to have more, much more. The ants understood this. They were eager to gather more crystals because the queen was the mother of them all. Her happiness made the whole ant nest a happy place. So, keep that in mind, third grade. Make your moms happy, and the whole family's happy. It was late in the day when they departed. Long shadows stretched over the entrance to the ant kingdom. One by one, the insects climbed out, following the scout, who had made it very clear. There were many, many more crystals where the first one had been found, but the journey would be long and dangerous. The ants marched into the woods that surrounded their underground home. Dusk turned to twilight, and soon twilight to night. The path they followed twisted and turned, every bend leading them deeper and deeper into the dark forest. More than once, the line of ants stopped and anxiously listened for the sounds of hungry spiders. But all they heard was the call of crickets echoing through the woods like distant thunder. Few dew formed on the leaves above, and without warning, huge droplets fell on the marching ants. A firefly passed overhead that for an instant lit up the woods like a flash of green and blue light. At the edge of the forest stood a very tall mountain. The ants looked up and could not even see its peak, for it seemed to reach up high, high into the heavens. But they did not stop. Up the side they climbed, higher and higher. The wind whistled through the cracks of the mountain's face, and the ants could feel its force bending their delicate antennae. Their legs grew weak as they struggled up that mountainside. At last they reached a ledge and crawled through a narrow tunnel. When the ants came out of the tunnel, they found themselves in a strange world. Smells that they had known all their lives. Smells of dirt and grass and rotting plants had vanished. There was no more wind. But most puzzling of all, It seemed that the sky had disappeared. They crossed smooth, shiny surfaces and then followed the scout up a glassy, curved wall. They had reached their goal, and from the top of the wall they looked below to a sea of crystals. One by one, the ants climbed down into that sparkling treasure. Quickly, they each chose a crystal, then turned to start their journey home. There was something very unusual about this place that made the ants very, very nervous. In fact, they left in such a hurry that none of them had noticed two small ants who had stayed behind. "Why go back?" asked one ant to the other. "This place may not feel like home, but look at all these crystals." "Yeah, you're right," said the other ant. "We can stay here and eat this tasty treasure every day forever. Who wants to go back to a cold hole in the ground?" So the two ants ate crystal after crystal until they were so full they couldn't move anymore and fell asleep. Daylight came and the sleeping ants were unaware of changes that were taking place in their newfound home. A giant silver scoop hovered above them, then plunged deep into the crystals. It shoveled up both ants and crystals and carried them off high into the air. The ants were wide awake when the scoop turned upside down, dropping them from a frightening height. They tumbled through space in a shower of crystals and fell into a boiling brown lake. Then the giant scoop stirred violently back and forth, and crushing waves fell over the ants. They paddled hard to keep their tiny heads above water, but the scoop kept spinning that hot brown liquid. Around and around it went, creating a whirlpool that sucked the ants deeper and deeper down. They both held their breath and finally bobbed to the surface, gasping for air and spitting mouthfuls of that terrible, bitter, brown water. Then the lake tilted and began to empty into a cave. The ants could hear the rushing water and felt themselves being pulled toward a pitch-black hole. Then, suddenly, the cave disappeared, and the lake once again became calm. The ants swam to the shore and found that the lake had very steep sides. They hurried down the walls that held back the lake. The frightened insects looked for a place to hide, worried that the giant scoop might shovel them up again. Close by, they found a huge round disc with holes that could neatly hide them. But as soon as they had climbed inside, their hiding place was once again lifted, tilted, and lowered into a dark space. When the ants climbed out of the holes, they were surrounded by a strange red glow. It seemed to them that every second the temperature was rising, getting hotter and hotter. And it soon became so unbearably hot that they thought they would soon be cooked. But suddenly, the disc they were standing on rocketed upward, and the two ants went flying through the air. They landed near what seemed to be a fountain of water, a waterfall pouring from a silver tube. Both ants had a powerful thirst and longed to dip their feverish heads into that refreshing water. They quickly climbed along the tube, and as they got closer to the rushing water, the ants felt a cool spray. They tightly gripped that shiny surface of the fountain and slowly leaned their heads into the falling stream. But the force of the water was just much too strong. Suddenly, the tiny insects were pulled off of the fountain and plunged into a wet, dark chamber. They landed on half-eaten fruit and other soggy things. And suddenly, the air was filled with loud, frightening sounds. that chamber began to spin around and around and around. The ants were caught in a whirling storm of shredded food and stinging rain. Then, just as quickly as it had started, the noise and the spinning stopped. Bruised, battered, and dizzy, the ants climbed out of that chamber. In daylight, once again, they raced through puddles and up smooth metal wall. In the distance, they saw something that appeared to be comforting. Two long, narrow holes that reminded them of the warmth and safety of their underground home. They climbed up into the dark openings, but there was no safety inside these two holes. A strange force passed through the wet ants. They were stunned senseless and then blown out of the holes like bullets from a gun. When they landed, the tiny insects were too exhausted to go on, so they crawled into a dark corner and fell fast asleep. Night had returned when the battered ants awoke to a very familiar sound. The footsteps of their fellow insects returning for more crystals. The two ants slipped quietly to the end of the line. They climbed the glassy wall and once again stood amid the treasure. But this time, they each chose a single crystal and followed their friends home. Standing at the edge of their ant hole, the two ants listened to the joyful sounds that came from below. They knew how grateful their mother queen would be when they gave her their crystals. And at that moment, the two ants felt happier than they'd ever felt before. This was their home. This was their family. And this was where they were meant to be. I hope you liked this story. Little lesson in there about greed and selfishness, right? And sometimes you've heard the saying, the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. Sometimes we think that other people have it better or that things can be better than what we have. But what really matters most is being home with our family, for that's where we are meant to be. And I miss being home with my family here at St. Margaret's and look forward to the day when I am back here at school with you, third grade, and with everybody else at our home called St. Margaret's. Until next time, third grade, be safe, be healthy, and be strong. Bye-bye, third grade.